Well, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. I think can I get all the Alaskans to raise their hand who are in the audience here? There, look we got a whole, so I'm going to extend this on behalf of everybody. It's a little hot in DC right now. So as Dr. Moran said, we would love to have you guys up in Alaska. Next year, you know, the Iditarod's going. You can do some ocean policy, science, watch the Iditarod. So we're going to get you up there soon, okay? And I think you'll love it. But I just wanted to first thank Dr. Moran. I just want to start by thanking all of you. Because, you know, one of the things I'm going to emphasize here, I'm only a newbie, right? I'm a freshman. The media loves to play all the conflicts that happen in DC. Nothing gets done. We can't do anything. Democrats and Republicans don't work together. And I think you're going to see Ed Markey today. I think Sheldon Whitehouse. I mean, we're working together on a lot of important issues, particularly as it relates to oceans. So don't believe that all the hype about nothing gets done, everything's partisan. You may have seen that we passed the IUU fishing bill and legislation. I mean, to me, just last year, something we've been working on for 10 years. Hugely important to our oceans, to our stocks of fish. And that was a great example. Democrats, Republicans, industry, environmental groups coming together to move forward a really important piece of legislation that we had been working on for a long time. One of my staffers, Eric Elam's here. He shepherded through that, the Commerce Committee. So that was a good example. So there's a lot of that going on. And what I want to really emphasize to you is how important what you do, particularly with regards to oceans, because none of the decisions we make can be made without good science and good data. And that, to me, is the message I really want to leave with all of you. You know, Dr. Moran already mentioned it. Alaska has 6,640 miles of coastline. So more than all the rest of the United States combined in my state. We got a lot of big things in Alaska, so we like to talk about those, but that's one that's actually very important. In a healthy ocean, healthy coastal communities are absolutely positively critical to my state. As a matter of fact, one of the first things I did when I became a new member of the Senate last year was go to the majority leader of the Senate and say, being on the Commerce Committee is my #1 issue. I committed to my constituents that I would do that because that's a committee that actually has oversight over all that you do. And that's a committee that is enormously important to my state. And so that's one of the committees that I'm on, and it's certainly a committee that I know matters to a lot of what you're focused on. So let me talk a little bit about our experience in Alaska managing oceans and our fisheries. I'll start with a little personal story. As you know, there's Alaskans who have been involved in our fisheries, not for generations, which we have a lot. We have a lot of members of the fishing community from Homer today. But our native Alaskan members of our great state have been involved with fisheries for generations. And their traditional knowledge on a lot of these issues is really the basics, the start of science on oceans and our fisheries thousands of years ago. So my wife's family is at the Baskin. They have a traditional native Alaskan fish camp way up on the Yukon River. And you know, you ask my wife how long they've been doing that, catching king salmon, smoking kings up on the Yukon, maybe 10, 20,000 years. Really? So there's a lot of knowledge that predates a lot of us. And that's where you see the deep roots in Alaska of how important our fisheries are. So we have sports. We have a sport fishery, which is obviously very important to the state, a huge economic driver to my state. Last year, more than 470,000 resident and non-resident sports fishing licenses were sold in Alaska, in a state of 730,000 people. So you see how important that is. But let me also talk about the commercial fishery and how important a healthy ocean is to that. Almost 60% of all seafood harvested and landed in the United States comes from Alaska. Huge number. Matter of fact, I see my friend Ed Markey just walked in. He and I was in Boston just a couple days ago at the Boston Seafood Show. I've used this term, no offense to the great state of Massachusetts, that given that number is 60%, Alaska, we're the superpower of seafood. And again, we need healthy oceans. So when I was in Boston, I called Ed and said, Ed, we got to walk the floor of the seafood convention together. I'm in your great city, great state. So unfortunately, I called him at the last minute, but we're going to do that next year. Right, Ed? Yeah, so that's going to be a lot of fun. So as you can imagine, sporting interests, commercial interests, subsistence interests, which I talked about, there's bound to, of course, be some tension. But what we've had is a long history of trying to work through these different interests. And I can't emphasize how important these communities, the coastal communities, are in our state. So as you can imagine, as I mentioned, whether it's 10,000 years ago or even now, managing fisheries is in Alaska's DNA. In fact, it was one of the main drivers of our statehood. We're a very young state, which was achieved, as many of you know, in 1959. Fisheries, in many ways, was the driver. Our Constitution is the only constitution in the country that bans fish traps. Think about that. Very interesting. If you look at the history of Alaska, a lot of it was driven by these issues in terms of the managing of fisheries and the ability for us as a people in Alaska to have more control over that. So what's happened since statehood? Alaska's done a good job at managing its resources in state waters, but we couldn't control what happened in federal waters. In fact, many residents of Alaska's coastal communities back 40 years ago and beyond could see a wall of lights off their shores emanating from large foreign ships who were catching Alaska's fish and taking our economic potential back home with them to other countries. And also, importantly to all of you and what you focus on, we're not helping manage our oceans in a sustainable way. So enter the late, great Senator Ted Stevens and Warren Magnuson, and they put together landmark legislation called the Magnuson-Stevens Act, the MSA. As a matter of fact, I chaired a hearing in the Commerce Committee just last week on the 40th anniversary of the Magnuson-Stevens Act and what it meant to Alaska, but also what it meant for the country and how very much it was an act focused on science, focused on data-driven management of our oceans and our fisheries. So since its passage, the MSA has successfully Americanized our fisheries and built the fishing industry, and certainly one of the most important economic drivers and employers in Alaska. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know this. Alaska, we employ more people in the fishing industry than we do in any other industry, including the oil and gas industry. So through the MSA's guiding principles and the regional fish management councils who rely on science and data, we have opened up a transparent management process that I know many of you participate in that has helped us sustainably manage our fisheries. And I think many people, just again being in Boston a couple days ago, recognize at least the northern region, the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council is widely recognized as probably the best managed fishery in the world. And again, it's because it's not about politics, it's about data and science. Data-driven policies are critical, and they're not always easy to abide by if you have decreases or increases in quotas. But But what I've tried to do in my first year in the Senate is fight to increase funding for fisheries management and the research activities that many of you undertake, including on issues like ocean acidification research. We've been focused on legislation that would provide additional resources to the Coast Guard to protect the well-being of NOAA employees, increase funding for charting and hydrographic surveying, and implementing international fish treaties, which are so critical to the overall health of our oceans. And I've been very supportive of legislation to reauthorize the Integrated Ocean Observing System and Sea Grant Program. So I want to emphasize and conclude by where I began, by mentioning two of my colleagues, good friends of mine, Senators Markey, Senators Whitehouse. Oceans are not a partisan issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. I believe that the conservation and management that we've done a good job in, certain regions of this country better than others, they must go hand in hand with science-based decisions and data, but we cannot allow a desire for pure preservation to replace a productive domestic fishing industry, seafood industry that employs so many people across the country and is so important to so many coastal communities in my state and many others. So Alaska has clearly proven that those who have the most at stake are those who are the closest to the resources and are in the best position with your help and science and data to manage, preserve, and sustain those resources for generations to come. So I want to thank all of you again for what you do and look forward to having a great conference here and in Alaska next year. I guarantee it won't be as hot as it is in this room right now. So really appreciate everything you do, and thanks again for the invitation. Thank you.